Let's jump right in by taking a look at how we can use primitive geometry to begin building up our ship. Before we start actually building, I do want to stress again that I don't want you to spend too much time thinking about trying to match the shape exactly, or stressing too much about mine doesn't look like yours or that sort of thing. I want you to really concentrate on just looking at the tools that we're using and use those. Give them your own spin maybe, but don't concentrate too hard on getting something that looks exact, because you can spend a lot of time just tweaking points and so forth. That's really not as important as it is to learn the different tools that we're going to be talking about. So with that said, we want to start to build up our ship. We don't have anything in the scene yet. So how can we start to build up some geometry? So let's think about the parts of our ship. So in my mind, the capsule on the middle of the ship is going to be sort of cylindrical shape. So that's what you want to think about when you're building a piece. What is the overall shape? What can I sort of break it down into? Even if it's distorted or there are things added, what's kind of the basic shape of the piece that you're creating? So our piece is going to be a cylinder. So in many cases, you can use what's called a primitive or a parametric object to start the modeling process. So a primitive is basically just a shape, a cube, a sphere, a cylinder. You're familiar with those kinds of shapes. So to bring those in Cinema 4D, we can go up to this command group here. We can see the little blue cube. And if I click and hold, you can see there are a number of different primitives that I can add to the scene. You can also access these under Create, Object, and you have the same selection here. So if I want to create a cylinder, I can go ahead and click on the command group, go over to Cylinder. You can see it's highlighted, and I'll release. And there you can see it in our editor, on our 3D view. So let's go ahead and take a look at this primitive. So right now, you can see this basic cylinder shape. So what can we do to this? Well, if we select it, you can see that it's here in our Objects Manager. You can see the little cylinder icon next to it. And if we come down to our Attributes Manager, you can see that we have, in these three tabs, we have a number of settings. Let's go ahead and concentrate just on the Object tab. So within these attributes, we have the ability to change the radius. So I can increase that amount here, and you can see the size and shape of that cylinder is reflected in our 3D view. So I can increase the radius. I can also increase the height. So I can drag that up. You can also interactively in your 3D view change those values by clicking on these handles. So I can click and drag to change the height here. Click and drag on this handle to change the radius. And different primitives will have different kinds of attributes that you can change with handles, so they won't all be exactly the same. Okay, with these handles I can change the radius and the height. As far as the segments go, we can't really see the segments right now, so we'll go up to Display, change that to Grow with Shading with Lines, and now we can see all of the lines coming down here. So if we want something that's really, really smooth, right from the start, we can go ahead and leave the rotation segments very high. But if we're going to have something that we want to manipulate as a polygon later, we may want to decrease the rotation segments, which is what I'm going to do. You can see as I take that number down, you can see that decrease visually on the model. I'm going to go ahead and set that down to 12. Now we can also change the height segments. So if we were think about manipulating this as a polygon, there's no way we can add any shape to this because there's no geometry going from top to bottom. There's no lines. So let's go ahead and add some height segments to it. And you can see they're evenly spaced, and I can go ahead and just set a value, and it creates an evenly spaced distribution of those lines here along the height. We could also change the orientation if we want to. If we knew we wanted it to go from side to side along the x-axis, we could do that. We could also go along the z-axis, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it on the y-axis kind of straight up and down. Now let's go ahead and proceed to slice really quickly. Now slice, you can use if you, for some reason, don't want a complete cylinder. Go ahead and turn that on. You can see that we can change the angle values in the from and to areas to create different proportions or wedges of that particular cylinder. And you can do it from any angle. You can see that the number of divisions stays the same, so they're actually stretched along whatever angle you happen to choose. In this case, we want the entire cylinder, so I'm going to go ahead and turn slice off. Let's now talk about the caps. So we'll go to the caps tab. Caps just indicates how the geometry on the end is created. So if we turn off caps, you can see we just get a hollow cylinder, which in some cases may be exactly what you want. Okay, in this case we do want geometry on the end, so we can go ahead and turn caps on. So it gives us some geometry at the end with a pole in the middle, what you'd expect on the end of a cylinder. We can change the number of segments. Okay, that doesn't change the shape at all, it just changes the resolution here along the cap. If we do want some sort of a curvature on the top or even just a bevel on the edge, we can turn on this fillet option. So if we turn this on, you can see by default it just gives us a little bit of a beveled edge. If we want to get a real tight edge, we can decrease this radius amount. And then in here you can see that that is indicated by, or that's set by the number of segments here. So if we want something that is just a strict flat bevel, we could just set one segment, or if we want something rounded, we could set more segments. If we increase this radius amount, we can actually get something that is more rounded on the end. And if I increase my segments here, you can see that I can sort of round that off. Okay, and you can change the cap segments as well. So this allows you to get something that's a little bit more rounded on the ends, which in my case, I think I want for the capsule shape. All right, so you can do some modeling here within our primitive shape. You can see that we could change the height and radius, we could change the number of segments, we can change sort of how the caps are created, but anything beyond that is going to be difficult to do. Now, we can change the shape of it using deformers if we want to, but we can't really do any polygon modeling on it. So let's go ahead and see how we can use a deformer on this. So let's go ahead and add a deformer, and you can either just click on this command group and choose the deformer and drop it in. So we want to bend, so we'll just go ahead and click that. And you can see it drops it above our cylinder in the hierarchy. Okay, so it's not a parent of anything, and the cylinder's not a parent of anything. Let me delete that. If you want it to actually come in underneath our cylinder, you can hit Shift. When you click on the cylinder, hit Shift and add the bend, and actually is parented underneath, which is where you want the deformer to be. Okay, so let's go ahead, and there's actually a box associated with this, so we just need to change the values here to be able to see our box. And let me make sure, yep, it's defined here. So here is our box, so we'll go ahead and increase this so it encompasses our cylinder. Okay, and now we can go ahead and change the strength of our bend. So in this case, I want to bend it kind of towards the back, so I'm going to take that strength to a negative amount to stretch that out. Now I want to keep actually the length, I don't really want to stretch it too much, and so I'm going to go ahead and say keep y-axis length, and you can see that that actually helped it to stay the same length. But I can change the bend strength. I could also change the angle if I wanted to bend it around that way or around that way, but I don't. I just want to bend it straight back. Okay, I can take the cylinder and rotate it to rotate the whole thing back. Okay, and you can see that since the bend is parented underneath, it comes along with it. Okay, so let's set that bend to maybe something like that. So maybe 50 degrees or so, minus 50 degrees in my case. But something like that as far as the shape goes. Now to do anything beyond this, we need to start converting this into a polygon object. And so to do that, we can go ahead and say over here, convert, make editable. Okay, C is a shortcut for that. We can also right click on this and go down to make editable. So let's go ahead and do that. So now we've made this editable. Now you can see that the icon has changed next to the cylinder, but we still have the deformer underneath. So if I turn off the effect of the deformer by clicking on this little green check mark, you can see that it goes back to the way it was. Now it does have the rotation on it, so you can see it still has that rotation. Okay. So at this point, we have a polygon cylinder. You can see that under the attributes, we don't have any attributes that we can manipulate. We don't have the height or the radius or anything like that. So now it's just a polygon that we can access. Now you could have gone ahead and made this editable before you added the deformer, and then added it after. You'd have the same effect. Okay, you'd still have the deformer underneath this. Now at any time, if you want to remove the deformer from your hierarchy and just say, okay, this is the basic shape that I want to go with. I want to take away the deformer, but I want to keep the shape. We can click on this cylinder, right click, and I'm going to set current state to object. And what that will do is, if I go ahead and delete this initial cylinder with the bend on it, it'll give us a copy of that cylinder with the deformation baked into it. Okay, and so now what we have is just a polygon shape that is bent like that, okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind here, if we come up to the top, we can now start to select our components. And so I'm going to go ahead and change to point mode. You can see now that we can select points on the surface. And if we were to go ahead and change to move, we can move those around. We couldn't do that with the polygon object. Okay, and I can come up in here and move these around. Same thing here. Okay. And so we can start to move those around. We can also come in and select our edges or our polygons. Okay, all things that we could not do if this was still a primitive or a parametric object. Okay, so once we've got this basic shape built, in the next lesson, let's actually come in and use some polygon modeling tools to start to manipulate this shape a little bit further. So we'll go ahead and do that in the next lesson.